At this time, we will begin the 17th International Myopia Conference Evening Seminar 3, Myopia Management Menicon Perspective. Dr. Kate Gifford of Myopia Profile Pty Ltd will be today's organizer. I will now turn the room over to Dr. Gifford.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to speak for less than 1 minute and then turn the room over to Steve and to Jack. So Steve Newman is Menicon's Executive Officer of Global R&D. He's an innovator extraordinaire and he'll challenge your thinking of what is possible. Jack Santo Domingo is Menicon's Clinical Affairs Manager and Senior Research Scientist in R&D. He's a highly accomplished researcher, being the lead author on the landmark MCOS, or Myopia Control with Ortho-K in Spain paper, which was the first published 2 years concurrently controlled Ortho-K study. Steve and Jack are here to explain the successes and the plans of Menicon in the myopia control space. In particular, they will explain Menicon Bloom, which is the first CE-marked myopia control management system containing Ortho-K. So to the futurist and the scientists, I now hand you over.
Thank you, Kate. Good evening, everybody. I'm going to start with a slide which is quite pertinent in that what did people in 1900 think the future would be like in 2000? And it's not about computers working, because they don't. But this was at a world exhibition. It's just to start our presentation. Menicon's position in terms of what we want to describe to you guys tonight with Menicon Bloom is not about the product per se, but it's more about the approach that we want to take of how we design and develop products and services, and how we then work towards helping the doctor-parent-patient relationship throughout the journey of that particular patient. And one of the key things we wanted to start this with is that we understand very clearly that in the time of history of contact lenses, at least, this is a very much of a watershed moment where we're starting to treat patients on a prospective basis rather than a remedial system. So what I thought we'd do is to start with this one. This was a world exhibition in Paris back in 1900. It was kind of like a science show. They had 50 million visitors from all around the world, and they asked visitors to this show to imagine what they thought the future would hold in 100 years' time. And they engaged a few artists to draw those images that these visitors explained to them. So we ended up with people thinking that in 100 years' time, they should have an electric scrubbing machine. We ended up with the Roomba, so that kind of worked. They imagined a flying postman at 1900, which is quite innovative, and now we have Amazon taking care of that. Another thing they imagined was an education induction machine where you could just churn the books in, put on your earphones, and you would learn everything. So perhaps myopia would not be approaching its epidemic levels had we picked up that project back in the 1900s. But we didn't. And we have areas of crisis. We have students under amazing amounts of pressure. Personally, I live in Singapore. I work with Stan and others, and we see the impact of the miracle that is Singapore and the amount of patient work that has to go on because of that. Kids starting school at 3 years old, doing preschool studies and not going outside because we live in the tropics. And this is a consequence of that. So Menicon as a company is very, very aware of that. And as a group, we have put together a global myopia team. We are looking at what we can do to also improve our educational levels, global educational levels in the area of myopia and its management. And that's what we want to really talk about today. Our team basically consists of Jack and a number of others, of really good scientists, and we have treated this project, or this whole concept, as I mentioned, as something which should be basically a cradle-to-the-grave mentality, where we're not just looking after the mid-type of patient that we've typically seen, but we need to look after the kids all the way through to the older people. So what Jack's going to do is explain the Bloom program and what we're doing, and then I'm going to explain after that how we're trying to develop a system to be able to manage that. Just be very delicate.
Thanks, Steve, and thank you to all of you for sticking around so late in the day. But I tell you what, we have some really exciting news that we're going to share with you today, because we have developed the Menicon Bloom myopia control management platform to offer a range of treatments to help reduce the progression of myopia, correcting vision both during the day and at night. And the Bloom logo, the change in color that we develop in the Bloom is the transition that signifies a gentle care for the eye with Menicon Bloom, while the infinity loop logo represents the continuous relationship with the patient. Menicon Bloom myopia control management platform encompass both Menicon Bloom Day, which is our future soft contact lens option for myopia control, and Menicon Bloom Night, which is Menicon orthokeratology lens specifically indicated for myopia control. We are going to focus today on Menicon Bloom Night in presenting to you Menicon Bloom Night because this outstanding myopia care therapy has just recently received CE approval for myopia control, just a couple of months ago after a very long and hard road of preparation. So Menicon Bloom Night is not just like selling a pair of contact lenses. It is a unique myopia control management system which is available only on a subscription basis, and that comes with replacement lenses. The lens selection and fitting is optimized by the use of a corneal topographer and Menicon EasyFit software, which is a sophisticated and user-friendly tool to guide the eye care practitioner in the fitting of these lenses. The treatment, management, and monitoring is conducted with a unique virtual doctor app application that we have developed that enhance the communication process between the eye care practitioner and the patient and parents. And we use artificial intelligence to manage the feedback analysis and responses that the eye care practitioner receives. This Menicon Bloom Night comes with a specifically developed care solution that comes as a package, and this care solution has been branded Menicon Bloom Care. Menicon Bloom Care, as I say, is specifically designed for children. It comes in a unique bottle shape, which is a little bit smaller than the standard care solution bottle, and is manufactured in a softer plastic to enhance the handling experience in children. The virtual doctor application is an integral and major part of our myopia control management system, as it provides the benefit of continuity of service and maintenance of patient records, which is particularly important in the world that we live right now, where people travel around the world and relocate to new places. I'm not going to talk much about this because Steve is going to cover this in detail a little bit later. Menicon commitment is to provide eye care practitioners with on-label approved products specifically indicated for myopia control. We are working on the regulatory application of such products worldwide, and as I mentioned before, we recently obtained CE approval for myopia control in Europe. So I would like to touch on in the next few slides as to why regulatory approval for myopia control matters. There is a lot of information out there with regards to the topic of myopia control in children. And in an attempt to provide an evidence-based understanding of what we really know about myopia, the International Myopia Institute has put together a number of white papers that provide consensus on our current understanding in the most relevant topics of myopia. Steve and I have been heavily involved in the industry guidelines and ethical considerations subcommittee. So the next few slides are going to be based pretty much on the outcome from this work. So to understand why regulatory approval matters, we need to understand the regulatory process. And marketing a medical product requires a marketing authorization or product license for specific indications under specific conditions. And that's typically regulated by the country's Medicines and Healthcare Product Regulatory Agency. The marketing authorizations include the product agreed term of use or the label. And that's basically to ensure that a medical product meet the highest standards of safety, efficacy, and quality before becoming commercially available for that particular indication. In the case of Europe, products that hold a marketing authorization are designated as CE marking. So prescribing a licensed product outside the approved term of scope that's basically what we call off-label, and that's what typically has been happening over the last few years with myopia control. But now we're starting to have a number of on-label options available. So until now, healthcare professionals sometimes practice off-label prescribing to address a deficit in effective approved products. Manufacturers, however, are typically prohibited from marketing or promoting off-label uses of products to induce commercial sales, and that's known as misbranding. Regulatory bodies, though, do not regulate the way medical products are ultimately used in practice. Prescribing a medical product, regardless of whether this is on-label or off-label, is really a decision to be taken within the relationship between the patient and the eye care practitioner. So here you can see the package, the intended use shown in the package insert of a well-known orthokeratology lens, where the manufacturer is clearly reporting that this lens is indicated for reducing the myopic refractive error. Therefore, if this lens is prescribed for the purpose of reducing myopia progression in children, that will be considered an off-label use. This is the intended use of Menicon Bloom, where is clearly seen that this lens is indicated for controlling myopia. And therefore, if this lens is used for the purpose of reducing myopia progression in children, that will be considered an on-label approved use. Another typical example of off-label prescribing occurs when a regular soft multifocal contact lens, which has an indication for vision correction in patients over 40 years of age with reading difficulties, is fitted for the purpose of myopia control in children, where both the indication, reading difficulties versus reducing myopia progression, and target group, presbyopic adults versus children, are different from those for which the product has been approved for. There are several contact lenses in the marketplace being mispromoted for myopia control, and the Industry Guidelines and Ethical Consideration Subcommittee has identified potential sources of bias presented to the public to claim efficacy of myopia control products. And these claims are basically based on treatment efficacy from limited term clinical trials, treatment efficacy based from animal studies, treatment efficacy based on presumption of device equivalence, mechanism of action, cumulative efficacy in the long term, and long term of comorbidities related to myopia progression. Let me give you a few examples. Let's say company X runs a 6-month clinical trial, and during that time, the trial shows the product to be effective in reducing myopia progression, and the company claims that this product is effective in reducing myopia progression in the long term. Another example would be to develop a product based on results on animal studies and claim the product to be effective in reducing myopia progression in humans. And another example would be to a company developing a lens which claims to be exactly the same of that of another company, which have been shown to be effective in reducing myopia progression and claims, okay, my lens is exactly the same as this other lens, and therefore is effective in reducing myopia progression. So, despite manufacturers are typically prohibited from promoting off-label uses of products, there are some sources of information that are allowed, and typically these are the dissemination of scientific information in scientific meetings or research papers or meetings like this one, like IMC. So the Industry Guidelines and Ethical Considerations Subcommittee has developed a flowchart to better understand the decision-making process in prescribing treatments for myopia control, taking into account regulatory considerations. So let me just run through this. So if you thinking to prescribe something for myopia control, the first thing that you have to ask yourself from a regulatory standpoint is, are there on-label options available? And if yes, you're very encouraged to go that path. And if the on-label is effective, that's really where you should be going. You might be in a situation in your particular country where there are no on-label options available, or that the on-label option available is not effective for whatever reason, and then you might have to consider going off-label. If you have to, or if you decide to go off-label, there are a number of questions that you have to ask yourself. Is the off-label use subject to substantial peer review? So in other words, is there sufficient evidence out there that justify the safety and efficacy of that particular product for that particular use that you intend? Is the off-label use medically necessary for treatment? Is the treatment non-experimental? And very important, has the patient been informed that this product that you are feeding is off-label and has agreed to receive that off-label treatment? Well, if you are happy with all that, then you might want to continue with your off-label treatment, and if not, you might want to try a different treatment. There might be a case where, from the ECP point of view, both the on-label and the off-label treatment are equally safe and effective, and in that particular case, patient knowledge and decision is crucial in choosing the treatment. So make sure you inform the patient that there are two options, one which is approved for that particular indication, and another one which might give you the chance of a successful result, but at the same time, there might be some unknown risk. Because contact lens prescribing for myopia control is a sensitive subspecialty of contact lenses, in that ECPs are treating young patients and sometimes over a large number of years, and in many cases with off-label devices, the use of informed consent and assent form are strongly recommended. The informed consent should include the treatment objectives and goals, should describe the risk and benefits associated with the treatment, whether there are several options or not for myopia control, whether the product to be prescribed is approved or not, and of course, allow the patients to ask some questions. So many composition in addressing myopia has been to tackle it from the perspective of providing eye care practitioners around the world the best possible on-label tools. And while that sometimes proved to be the harder path, and I can tell you we have been working on this for many, many years, it is absolutely the only one that Menicon will follow, because our top priority has always been the safety of our customers' eyes. So Menicon is committed to providing ECPs from around the world on-label products intended for myopia control use, and is dedicating significant resources for this particular purpose. So this is just the beginning. So stay tuned to our future developments and announcements. And with that, thank you very much. I'm going to hang up back to Steve.
Okay, I'm going to try and get 20 minutes compressed into 10. So bear with me, since we've got a short timeline. But as I prefaced in the beginning, I wanted to explain our approach to myopia management as the aftercare side of things, as opposed to what we do in terms of the actual products and the way we want to present the products, which is what Jack's just explained. We want to develop a lifestyle approach to the cradle to the grave mentality, and in doing so, be able to allow that patient to have control, and the doctor to have control of their treatment over the course of it. So as part of our research, obviously we looked at the demographics of where myopia is prevalent, where it's spreading to. As an interesting exercise, I thought, well, we'd go back 500 years and see where the population started from, where it would disperse, and you can see as we get to the 1900s, when Paris had its big exhibition, I mean, basically when the industrial age came in, education started becoming more easily accessible, travel became better. There is this explosion in the last 100 years of our population and density of same. So we also looked at what that would look like in a shorter term and how it would align with Brian Holden's prediction of the half the population of the world being myopic by 2050 and where that would occur. And currently, we have about 4.5 billion people in Asia, and 2030, it keeps rising, but Africa is rising very rapidly as well. And by 2050, Asia constitutes over half the world's population, but Africa has also doubled. So are we going to see a myopia explosion in Africa as well? The other thing to look at is in the migration, that we looked at anyways, the migration patterns. What happens to these patients who are basically prescribed in one country, they start their treatments, and then they move around? One of the highest levels of migration right now is out of Asia to service other countries, and the incoming into Asia is only about, say, 7 million per year versus 60 to 70 million outgoing. Japan, for example, has just this year started issuing 250,000 long-term visas for mostly Asian people to come in and help help aid in the declining population. So many countries are now starting to look at, can they improve, can they help their own economies by migration? What that means is the patients who are myopic are going to be moving to different caregivers, and they're going to be moving to different countries where they may not get the continuity of care which will best service them. In the US alone, the average person will move 11.7 times in their lifetime. And that's obviously going to allow them, or basically create a situation where they're not always going to be able to get the same care. Natural disasters will also contribute to patients losing their records, doctors losing records. Jack's experiencing this right now. He's just moving house. He's got 20 years of medical data. He has no idea what to do with. And because this data is basically free-formed, he can't aggregate it and put it into any kind of meaningful form. So what we looked at is, where would that leave us? We have a very populated planet. We have people moving all over the place. We have basically siloed medical systems with no real integration or no continuity across different platforms. So how could we end up making the patient's life easier and helping the doctors understand what their patients are doing and when? So we've basically been working in getting involved in a system with essentially global cloud-based medical platforms, which will help us in terms of managing these patients in myopia across the e-medicine growth. And as we know, face-to-face prescription giving, face-to-face consultations are declining. E-medicine, remote capabilities are increasing and will continue to increase over the years. Current issue is, as I mentioned before, everything is siloed. So the primary caregiver doesn't necessarily get to see what their secondary caregiving is giving, or the tertiary, depending on what that patient has to go and see or do, depending on the condition of their eyes or their process through their myopia journey. At the home level, we do have applications now. We have systems that can monitor patients at home, but they generally stand alone, and they generally do not connect into the silos, and they do not allow to get a proper overview of what's happening to that patient's life. So our current plan and our current system is to address that by getting this cloud system to enable this continuity of service or continuity of data across all the different levels of patient service. And on top of that, we are looking at dark data and the legacy-based systems that we take patients' prescriptions and we take patients' histories, but we do it a lot in freehand, and there is no systematic and structured method of taking that data and utilizing it later on to gain insights into what that patient's going through, or in fact, how a group of patients are performing. So what we're developing is a smart patient history system where we can capture the data in a structured manner so that it is not freehold, or not freeform, rather. We have a virtual review platform, personalized reporting, which means that patients' progress can be monitored, managed, and personalized by the primary caregiver. And that will be tied into this pathology tree. Right now, the guys that we're working with can analyze and manage around 225 million different coefficients within the ophthalmic world. And therefore, we can start looking at how we can create different and better prognoses based upon actual real-world evidence. The system will also allow us to integrate input from accident and emergency, for example, GPs, schools, different primary caregivers, different hospitals, different service centers, and can aggregate that into the one platform so that that data becomes more relevant over time. The system will also allow, it's basically agnostic. We can take the information from any instrument, utilize that to help put that into the patient's record, allow the doctors to analyze that data. But more importantly, as from Menicon's perspective, we're tying that into our design and our manufacturing process so that the patient's system or the patient's optical needs, whether they be from a GP lens or a soft lens or other service, can be integrated into our platform as well. So we know what we're doing and what we're providing for that patient based upon real-world data. So the idea is that we will provide a patient with a global passport that they can carry for life, and that will allow them to have their data managed from the time they're 6 with their parents all the way through to when they're an adult or into their older age, and that data will not be lost, and it can be used on an anonymized basis to gain real-world data as to the efficacy of the services that we're providing. So to connect that through the patient, we have developed an app called the Virtual Doctor app, which basically provides this link between the primary eye caregiver, the parent at a certain point in time, and then the patient for the life of the patient. And that's one of the fundamental pieces of the puzzle with the Bloom Care. So just to show you how it works, the app is a smart app in as much as it will know who is accessing it, who is using it. It will learn through the age of the patient. So in this instance, it's basically the doctor. It's the real doctor taking a selfie with the patient, communicating directly through to the parent and asking the parent the kind of questions that they need to get, and doing this on a periodic and structured basis so that we can manage this data by artificial intelligence in the background and understand what we need to do to manage that patient and help their journey. It will give the metrics every time at the end of the week or any kind of a structured period, which allows the doctor to understand how well that patient's working with the system, whether they're compliant or not. And then it will also allow, as the child gets older, it will allow the doctor to auto-interface directly with the child that's under question. What will happen is the app will recognize that child, recognize his or her age, and it will reflect that in the skin that the child sees and the type of questions that the doctor asks. So now those questions will be tuned to the age and demographic of that patient and essentially personalize the communication channel between the professional and the recipient. One of the things we want to do with this is essentially expand that so that the level of communication remains through the doctor-parent interface, a child interface, and so they feel very comfortable giving this information, and that the parent obviously understands that their child is compliant, for example. The doctor understands compliance is being managed. And one of the things that we're aware of, or very careful about, is that all of the data that we have looking at myopia control now, looking at the various systems, are all derived from structured clinical studies. But that doesn't reflect the real world. And we all know that patients are generally not that compliant. We don't know yet whether children will remain as compliant as they should under these systems, or whether parents will make their children be compliant. But the only way to know is to get data from the real world. So this is one of the techniques we want to use to do that. In the back end, we are capturing the anonymized data of the actual lens itself and how it can be performing. And one of the areas that we can do with this system, with the permission of the doctor and the parents, is we can analyze the actual progression of the myopia through the instrumentation that's being used to analyze those patients, for example, axial length. And that will allow us to get a lifetime journey of how that patient's progressing. On a global basis, if you can look at it from gathering that data, we should be able to start to get global data, which is meaningful to us as a community in understanding what myopia is really doing. So we put together a little video to basically show what Menicon's trying to do, which I'd like to share with you as I conclude. Thank you. And with that, I'd just like to thank you very, very much for your attention and apologize for our technical problems at the beginning of it. So thank you.
We have time for one or two questions, although obviously we're also standing between you and a well-earned beverage at the end of the day. So are there any questions at all from the audience?
Yes.
Yep.
Wonderful book. I'm very impressed of all of the content. So you have proposed the Bloom virtual doctor. So what does it really mean? That the doctor is internet and everywhere from the world that the patient can have some consultation with the doctor. I like to know more about this virtual doctor concept.
Okay, the concept is that when the patient first presents, the image that they see in their app is actually their primary caregiver, is their doctor. So they can take a selfie with them or a photograph. And the idea is basically taken from normal social media, from Facebook, etc. There's a much tighter bond. There's a much higher level of trust if you know it's your doctor talking to you or the doctor talking to the parents, as opposed to kind of an abstract avatar. What it means is that if you have that relationship with this primary caregiver in, say, one country, and let's say, for example, you're a parent and your child is 6, you're working with this doctor for maybe 2 or 3 years and you live in Japan, you then get posted over to Singapore, so you have a different doctor. So you can go to that doctor, and then you can upload the new doctor into the system, okay? But the issue is, the key is you still have the record of all of the correspondence with your older doctor. The artificial intelligence is basically posing these questions. The questions can change and move based upon the responses that the parent or the child is giving. And essentially, the criteria is that we can set metrics behind the scenes which can gauge whether or not that patient or their parents' feedback from the patient is working within the norms that we would expect. For example, if they were having some trouble with insertion or overnight comfort on a chronic basis, the app can pick that up through the responses, and then the app can also make a de facto response on behalf of the doctor saying, we think you should maybe come in for another visit, or we know you're having some problems, we'll call you or give you a call. That data is fed back into the doctor contemporaneously, so they understand it, but they don't have to sit there and call the patient every day. But from country to country, from place to place, that relationship can be managed and uplifted and uploaded for every new doctor that patient sees. One of the biggest challenges we have right now in the medical industry is that if you move somewhere, your records stay where you came from, you have to start generating new records when you get there, and there is no continuity of service. And more importantly, from a compliance perspective, there's no visibility of whether that patient is being compliant, so therefore is that system working or not? We have no idea. So under a clinical study, we can get a gauge as to whether or not it's working. But in the real world, unless there is some continuity of management of data and understanding it and basically reviewing of that data, we will have no idea whether or not that's working. And from our perspective, we're saying, well, look, if we're going to be serious about trying to make a myopia management system that works, it's not perfect now, but ultimately we have to get real-world data to understand what's happening in the real world so we can make those improvements.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Yep. Anji, do you want to come to, or I can run up? I'll just run up.
Sorry, this is a wonderful idea, but I just want to make sure that you made appropriate, check with, regulations around the world that it's
Yes.
really, really safe for patients and doctors to share that kind of information.
We basically have already gained HIPAA approval, CE approval. All of the data is fully encrypted. We have been working with this company that we're doing this with in terms of testing with Google, etc. We have already received approval in the countries that we wish to enter into. The treatment of the data, as you said, is very, very critical, particularly in certain countries like Germany with very, very high levels of privacy laws. Every single part of the information that's uplifted is basically encrypted, and no data from the practitioner actually gets transferred into the system. It's a cloud-based setup so that we can actually get the encrypted data that we need from the image from, say, a visual field analyzer or a OCT system. we can get that on an encrypted basis, which does not relate to the patient per se. So the privacy of the patient is fully managed. It is at the same level as you would be looking at from online banking or using your mobile phone for banking, etc. The key element of this is it never touches the practitioner. So it's like Mission Impossible, basically Tom Cruise getting down to the floor but not actually touching the floor. So it doesn't have to be integrated into anybody's system. It can work above that. And that's one of the reasons why it will be so flexible and why we believe that this is a harbinger of what's going to come in the future with medicine anyway. It's just how that patient's data is treated. So with our system right now, it's basically patient, doctor, private. There's no question about that. And the patient basically, if they want to go to another doctor, obviously has their data, which they can then do anything like a normal referral letter to the next doctor. But the difference is it's done in the cloud, it's electronic, the data is structured so it's able to be used over time to make a case for something or to analyze something, which currently is not in play. And it will allow ultimately to get a much better picture of what that patient's doing. And our primary purpose from the patient's perspective is that once they get all the way through, they will have their records for life. So it means that whatever treatment they've had, whatever they've been doing, they've been encouraged to use the proper process, the proper lens usage, the proper treatment throughout their journey. One of the things we know from our experience with some of our customers, some of our partners, is that it's all very well to work with your optometrist or your ophthalmologist in the practice, but once that patient goes out into the real world, maybe 30 to 40% of what they've been taught goes completely out of their ears, or they don't have the confidence to understand what they were being taught in the first place because it's a little bit above them, or they were feeling a little bit intimidated whilst they were going through that process. So it becomes their own learning curve. And what that means is you'll get multiple levels of deviation from what should have been the right practice. And we see that all the time in standard contact lens wear anyway. So our belief is that given the seriousness of this system, of myopia control per se, and given the seriousness of what we're trying to do, given its perspective and it's a proper therapy, as opposed to just a remedial treatment, we should try and make it as easy as possible for patients to comply and then guide them through that whole journey.
Okay, last question to Stan. Running up.
You knew you would ask it.
Can Dr. A then transfer records to Dr. B? Or does he have to the records will be with the patient who will then transfer to Dr. B?
In the future world, the records can be signed across to the new doctor by the patient because they are the patient's records. It's their medical records. Dr. A never loses the records. They're never taken from that doctor. That's part of their process. If Dr. B wants to call up Dr. A and say, hey, little Sally was doing this, I've noticed her behaviors are not that or that, that relationship exists. And if you want to put it onto even a shorter relationship, which is very common, or hopefully not very common, but certainly there are some elements, between optometry and ophthalmology. How do you link, or between even GPs and optometry and ophthalmology, how do you link those different disciplines for the benefit of the patient when right now there is this kind of competitive nature between them in such a way that can be detrimental to their healthcare? And that, I believe, is starting to change, and it needs to change so that if the patient is wearing some certain system or certain lenses, needs to go and see an ophthalmologist for a checkup, that relationship or that understanding of what happened is more than just a referral letter backwards and forwards.
Yeah.
So no, they don't lose their records.
Yeah, I know, but does A transfer records to B, or does it have to be transferred through the patient?
No, under our system right now, it would be the patient can basically say, look, I'm signing up with Dr. B, here's the access to my records to see what's happened to me.
Sorry, is there any concern with, say the patient seeing you and then they want to go to Dr. B? Where's the desire to want to stay or is that practitioner or if the other doctor said, well, you can do the same thing with me, but I'll charge 20% less to do this or 20% less to do that?
It's a good question. In any commercial exercise or any relationship with any person that's charging you a service, that can happen anyway. That happens every day right now with optometry in conventional daily disposable lenses, for example. It comes down to the service level. Our belief is there is less likelihood of that to happen if you have already set up this remote relationship with your patient through the app as opposed to saying bye-bye when that patient goes out the door. And then your only hope of connection with them is either you actively ring them, actively communicate with them through some mechanism, and keep that communication going, or they happen to call you back or come in on their scheduled visits. But what we're trying to do is actually enhance the relationship between the initial caregiver and that patient. So our thinking is that relationship from Dr. A to Dr. B is, in the shorter term, is more of a relationship between, say, an optometrist and ophthalmologist, or a first referral GP from the school, for example, up to the optometrist, but less so from one optometrist or one ECP to another ECP, unless, of course, there's some geographical reason to do that. If a patient have to move across state or somewhere else, there's a need for that. And the issue is right now, there is no mechanism in place that allows patients to keep those kind of connections. And there's no automatic transfer of records from, say, someone moving from Los Angeles to New York. It's just, you know, it's siloed there, you build them up, and they just don't get that continuity. And we think from, okay, in a daily disposal lens, I'm wearing -3s, I've been doing that for 5 years, I go overseas, it's not a big deal. But if it's in the middle of a prospective treatment, and maybe you're transitioning from ortho-K to daily disposable multifocus or something, we think that is actually very important. So that's, as I said, it's not perfect yet, we got to work on it, but that's the concept of what we're trying to do.
Thank you for the fantastic questions, everyone. Your brains are definitely still working at 7:15 on a Saturday night, so well done. I hope this gives you an idea of the size of the challenge and also the size of the vision that Menicon has. They have a comprehensive and absolutely global vision for myopia management. And you've got a good idea about what's available now and also what's possible for the future, always underpinned by Menicon's commitment to safety. So please join me in thanking Steve Newman and Jack Santo Domingo for this evening's session.
This concludes our program for evening seminar 3. We would like to extend our thanks to organizer and speaker Kate Gifford and speakers Jacinto Santo Domingo and Steve Newman. We appreciate your cooperation in answering our questionnaire. Please hand your completed questionnaire and empty lunchbox to nearby staff or attendants by the door. Thank you for joining us for evening seminar 3.